Hello, everyone. Welcome to another 2023 FallDocs screening. My name is Armando Zamudio, and I am the Public Programs and Events Coordinator here at IDA. For our blind and low vision attendees, I'm going to identify myself. I am a light-skinned Mexican-American wearing a white shirt, a black jacket, glasses, and standing in front of a white wall. Thank you to our media sponsor, KCRW, for sponsoring our 2023 FallDocs. This evening, we'll have a conversation between filmmaker Ryan White and director Julie Cohen, whose film Every Body premiered at Tribeca 2023. To see more amazing films like this, please visit www.documentary.org/FallDocs. Now, before we get started, I would like to offer a brief land acknowledgement. We recognize the Gabrielino Tongva as the past, present, and future caretakers of the land, water, and cultural resources in the unceded territory of Los Angeles. Thank you so much to Andrea Lust for ASL interpreting this discussion. And with that, I will pass it on to Ryan. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ryan White. I'm a documentary filmmaker, and for our blind and low vision attendees, I'm going to describe myself. I have brown hair and brown eyes. I'm wearing a blue shirt, and I'm in front of a wall of framed photographs. And I am here with my friend and prolific documentary filmmaker, Julie Cohen, who made the incredible film Everybody that I'm very excited to speak with her about. And Julie, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Yes, hi there. I'm Julie Cohen. I am a smallish white lady with glasses and a bright floral print shirt, standing in front of a bookcase in the study of my home.
Thank you, Julie. And thank you for inviting me to have this conversation with you. I just watched the film a couple nights ago with my boyfriend, and we were both floored by it. So I'm excited to get to talk with you about it and get to ask some questions about it. But I just want to begin by asking, like, how did you find this project? Is it one of those projects that found you, or did you find it? Because I know it can go either way. What's the
Absolutely,
genesis story?
in a pretty twisty, turny way, as things can be sometimes. So I was a staff producer at NBC News for many years, and in 2018, my friends at NBC News Studios, who were then sort of launching into the business of making docs, actually invited me to come back and look through their archives for stories that might make good jumping off points for documentaries. And I didn't even have to go searching. Like, I knew immediately, oh, I really want to look into, I think our viewers will have seen the film at this point, so I really want to look into that wild story about Dr. John Money and the Reimer twins, that like historical kind of stranger than fiction and like really alarming and disturbing and sad story. So just to see how I might, how could that be a documentary? And doing a little research into it, I mean, the key players had all passed away, and also, although the Everybody overall ends up actually being, I think, surprisingly upbeat, that story was like, told on its own would be like the most, well, it would be competing for the most depressing documentary of all time. It might not win. But so that doing research on the topic and the relevance is, and actually looking through all the field tapes of that story, there was a moment which we include in Everybody, which was not aired on the original Dateline piece about it, where David Reimer is explaining why he's decided to come forward and tell his, really personal, really painful story to, to a large television audience. And he says, I'm doing this because I've heard about surgeries being done on intersex babies and children because of the misinterpretation and frankly the lies about my own case. And it just prompted him to want to come forward. Of course, I'm watching this, 25-year-old field tape with the knowledge that David Reimer has not only died but killed himself, and it just made it so incredibly powerful. Like he's saying, I'm sort of speaking out because I understand what's been done incorrectly in my name and I want to put a stop to it. And that kind of led me into looking at, this is now 25 years later, what's going on with the modern day intersex rights movement. It turned out there's so much going on, and yet the news coverage of it has really been so minimal. And, maybe 10 years ago, it would have been much more difficult to find a bunch of activists eager to go on camera, but that's not true now. There are and were, as you saw in the film, these just sort of spectacular people who were doing amazing things and not getting enough attention for it, who were pretty enthusiastic about being part of this film.
So did you work on the David Reimer story when you were NBC, or you just remembered it and it had moved you back in the day?
It had moved me back in the day. I mean, this is getting insidey, but we had a system in NBC where you could, when your story was completed, the scripts would go into a scripts file and everyone could read them jointly. And sometimes when you're procrastinating on your own work, you would read other people's scripts. And I remember reading that story, which was an hour-long piece, and it produced by a great producer named Ruth Chanetz, and with the correspondent Keith Morrison, still on Dateline now. I remember reading it one act at a time, and actually calling Ruth and saying, "This story's amazing! Like, oh my God, I can't believe this." And I can't believe I didn't know about it. Always a good sign, I think, for potential territory for a doc. Like, this story is amazing, and how did I not know it already?
Yeah, I didn't know it already. And I was going to ask you, you kind of went there already, but it felt like you had access to raw footage from the Dateline episode. Like, it felt like you picked some moments that were really evocative that might not make network television, even in just some quiet moments in the interview. But can you talk about how much raw footage you had to work with from that episode?
Yeah, there was a lot. I had all of it. God bless the archiving people at NBC News, which I knew from having been a Dateline producer that we did save everything, and it's in a warehouse in New Jersey, and you can have boxes brought back to you. So really the first step was to watch all of the field tapes. And as you're saying, with an eye towards okay, I'm not doing a Dateline episode, I'm making a documentary here. So what are the moments that feel like they, are both telling a story, and also in some ways it's a little bit of a, I don't know, it's a little bit of a historical, the late 90s isn't exactly vintage, but TV feels different. TV then feels different than docs now. So getting a little bit of the mood of that, as well as hearing the parts of the story that of the stuff from NBC that's in the film. I'd say about half, probably a little bit more than half of it was actually on the air, and other stuff was from the field tapes.
And was the vision from the beginning then to scale up to modern day, I would assume? And then how did you find your three main subjects or characters?
Yeah, so yes, and the choice of words is always complicated these days. There's so many different words for how do we call the people that are in our documentary. You notice in the credits of the film, we went with starring because by the time the film was done, they felt like the stars. So that's kind of all I know to call them. But I don't think that's necessarily a word I would always use in this case. So, I always feel bad with these because you feel like you want to be saying that there's some like secret magical, expert only research that you do, but the real answer is Google. Um, when I wanted to get a sense of what's going on with modern day intersex activists, I think I Googled intersex activists. This was by the time we were at this stage in the story, I think this was 2019 or 2020. And at that time, Alicia had recently come out and was doing tons of social media. Like she's a great, actually, she just has a book out right now called Inverse Cowgirl, which people should check out. But she was very good with social media. So there were just tons of videos of her to be found, and it was clear that she was pretty ready to be coming forward and telling her story. That was kind of important to me. I didn't want to be like dragging someone into, I mean, you know what it's like for people in our films when a film comes out about them. They don't always know how to anticipate that in advance because it's not an experience they've necessarily had before. We know the major impact. So being thought full of thought, like thoughtful in that way, like thinking a lot about what the impact would be, it seemed clear that it was really important that people were already had some real experience talking publicly about these private details of their bodies. So Alicia seemed perfect for that. I had the thought from the start that I wanted everyone, the main people in the film, to know one another. I always find when I'm watching a verite doc with sort of multiple leads that it's really helpful if there's some real connection so you don't feel like you're being kind of jerked from one story to the next. So I kind of asked her about her activist friends. She introduced me to Saifa, who I talked to early on. He seemed amazing also, living in the UK right now, getting his PhD, but he had some plans to be coming to New York, so that was all good. And then on our first day of shooting, included that scene where they're all making posters, and River just showed up, and I did not know they were an actor at that point. I didn't really know anything about them, but you know how like certain people, like it's not like they say the camera loves certain people. I mean, River is a beautiful looking person, but also just has so much charisma. And like from that first day, there were about 8 people making posters. I interviewed all of them, and looking at the footage, the next day, River's interview just jumped out so much. And then actually when they spoke at that rally and told their story, which I didn't know when we were filming it, myself and the crew were all like, whoa, like, it really had an impact on us. And so, and it also, unlike Saifa and Alicia, who had told their story, who'd been telling their story for a while, this was River's kind of moment of coming out. So we were like, wow, it feels like we really kind of captured a moment. So I spoke to River about whether they would be interested in and willing for us to follow them around a bit, as obviously that then expanded to bringing their mom into the film and everything. And so we kind of went from there.
So that footage with River at the protest is actually the beginning of filming. It's not the end of your filming. I feel like that often happens for us. You have the illusion that that's years into filming, but that's actually right when you met them.
Yes, that was the poster making was the first day. The rally was the second day, and as we're filming this, I'm like, wow, it's weird because when you're doing verite, you think, we're following people we actually ended up following or filming at least for about 15 months. But like, even though that was I was like, this is so the third act. Like it just felt like wow, this is kind of the big moment. So we'll have to figure out how to reverse engineer and work to this moment. But it just felt like it just felt like a moment.
Let's talk about the beginning of the film. 2 parts of it that I want to talk about. Well, first of all, there's obviously the gender reveal, cold open, and I would love to hear about you and your editor's decision to do that, and tonally what you were going for. And then also the statistics that you do at the beginning, which I found framed in a really interesting way too, because you're I think you might even use like the pronouns you to your audience when you're talking to them. It's very it's very direct and almost casual. So both those things, the gender reveal cold open and leading with the statistics. Talk to me about that decision.
Yes. So, we understood that we were making a film where the subject matter was going to be quite new to a lot of our audience. So, figuring out a way to kind of draw people in right from the start and entertain them for that matter, which like I like to do with movies, kind of no matter what the subject matter is. Like the whole thing of gender reveal parties like seemed relevant to this, especially when we have that soundbite from Sypha that comes. That's the first soundbite you hear where he's saying like we live in a world that is so binary. So where do I, as an intersex person, where do I fit in? And like so setting up the binary world, like gender reveal parties just felt to me like the right way to do it, although I don't think I could have imagined how much fun it was to watch them. So like in the strictest, the song and the concept was my idea, but everything else was the team finding the footage. Oh, there were so much to choose from. Finding the footage and editing it all together. I don't know about you, I've often found that like that open is often like the last thing that we're working on. That was not true in this case. It was the very first thing that the editor Kelly Kendrick and I worked on. And so I'm like, some gender, here's a song, some gender reveal, gender reveal footage. I think the very first one, I'm like, I really love this crazy couple. But from there, and he came up with the thought of doing the split screens where you saw the different versions, in pink and blue of the same kind of explosion or the steams coming out of the car. Or anyway, I just definitely found it fun. And like a fun fact of trivia is that is also the editor Kelly Kendrick is singing, playing guitar, and playing drums in that cover of Be My Baby, because we couldn't find quite what we needed anywhere else. So he just
the doc nerd, before you talk about the statistics, the doc nerd has to ask me like, did you fair use that stuff, or did you have to license gender reveal videos? How did it work?
No, that was fair use.
Oh, nice.
That was fair use footage, and drawn from, we're not going into people's personal troves. That was drawn from like all kinds of best of things that people are taking part in. So
great. And then the statistics to lead with those slates at the beginning, to frame it for us and speak to us directly as an audience. What was that decision?
Yeah, it seemed, I feel like we were kind of a little bit more exposition-y at the top of this doc and kind of throughout it than you normally maybe want to be. There's always this thought of like, oh, but you want it to feel like this flowing work of art where nobody's like thinking about facts. But in this case, like to me, it feels important for our viewer to not feel confused and to have some general sense, which I think people want. It's always one of the first questions that I've gotten talking about this topic is like, oh, well, how many people are we talking about? It's actually kind of a complicated question to answer, and it has kind of various various ways of looking at it, depending on how broadly you're defining intersex, or so I didn't want to mislead people. And yeah, I don't, I think there's a hope throughout the film in a lot of different ways to create a very conversational tone between myself as the director and the editor and the team and our leads and the audience, like rather than, this is the kind of topic that like there's a lot of walls and secrecy and barriers, and maybe the best way around those kind of barriers is like, no, here we all are. We're having a conversation. If you're hearing my questions off camera, that's fine. I'm part of the, I'm there. I never really like to pretend like I'm not there because actually what's happening in cases isn't exactly what would happen in people's lives if there weren't a camera crew there. So sort of creating that feeling and like, it's funny. I did write those words. It occurred to me like, well, that's a little weird to say like, if you're surprised by these numbers, it's because, but like, and I was like, I wonder if anyone's gonna like, or any executive's gonna say, you can't say that. Nobody did. So there we go.
Great. Um, One of my favorite parts of the whole film, and I'd love to hear more about it and how you found it. I don't even know what you call it, but it's like that symposium from 1996. It kind of felt like your Crip Camp in a way, like finding a trove of footage from a movement before anyone knew about it, but footage exists from it, and everybody in that footage was just so fascinating and seemed so eloquent and thoughtful about their experience. But how did you find that footage? What was
Yes.
it?
So that footage is up on YouTube, although in that case I did speak with relevant the person who had shot the footage and some of the members of that circle. Um, you know, yeah, honestly, when I first saw it, I had the same thought. I'm like, oh, this is like Crip Camp.
Yeah.
Like, I loved Crip Camp.
Yeah.
People on hell outside a few decades ago. Um, I had an initial thought of maybe that group would be more a part of our story than they ended up being. That's primarily because as really the first generation of people that were coming out publicly as being intersex, many of them kind of burnt out on activism. I spoke to the leader of that group who was like, you know what, I'll help, and actually who did continue to send me information and let me know about other people to talk to, but didn't want to be on camera. And other people, actually, one of the woman with dark frizzy hair who actually talks so eloquently about the connection between her doctors and Dr. Money. She was willing to be on camera, but she's not an activist anymore. It's hard talking publicly about your genitals, frankly, and as a result, especially from this first group that were doing it, as a result, like, you do that for a couple of years and then it starts to feel like I don't necessarily want to do this anymore, and trying to figure out how to, like, I just had a rule that I didn't want to push anyone into this project, because I think there's potential beautiful parts of being a participant in it, and there's a potential painful part. So
How did you, I would assume this is a process with your editing team, but how did you, as you mentioned, the exposition or the amount of information that you have to give your audience to start from a certain foundation, general audience, I guess, to a certain understanding, which your subjects, I'm sure, have been dealing with their entire lives, having to harness that burden of kind of explaining yourself so that people can start having that conversation. I would guess, but I don't mean to put words in your mouth, that it was a very hard balance between information and emotion, or personal journeys and informing the audience, educating the audience. Like,
right.
was that a big part of the editing process? And can you talk about finding that balance and where you guys struck it?
Yeah. And yes, that was definitely something that editor Kelly Kendrick and I and our producer Tommy Nguyen, like, that it's just sort of putting stuff together and feeling what works. The biggest balance was almost between like giving enough information to explain without overwhelming or confusing the audience, because we found that as when we tried to sort of sometimes we tried to put in more facts that if you understood them entirely were quite interesting or dramatic, it turned out that no, you're just confusing
Right.
me about what surgery a person has and hasn't had. I also, like, I asked people talked about their surgery once and that was really it. I didn't go back and say let's talk about this more. Not that they asked me not to. It just felt like, you can say, we're so needy and greedy as documentary filmmakers. You're like, oh, we want this, we want that, we want you to be saying it like this and like that. And like, I'm just like, these are the interviews. I mean, we followed, we did verite footage, quite a lot of it, and that included a little interview. But the sit down interviewing, which we kind of did in a really specific, meant to be as not unpleasant as possible way. I don't know if you noticed that those interviews weren't lit. It was all natural light. Because having heard from both our consulting producer, Shauna Knizhnik, who is intersex, and the people in the film themselves about the experience of being on a doctor's table with lights coming at you and a bunch of people gathered around, we basically set we set the interview. The crew then left, and I was behind the camera, but with the DP pulling focus from another room. It was maybe a little of an artificial situation, but it just felt more comfortable for everyone. It just felt like it was going to be more comfortable for anyone concerned. Anyway, I feel like I've traveled far from your question, but trying to keep the balance between giving the audience the information that they were going to want, not overwhelming them so they were so confused, like, wait, what's going on with that person's anatomy again, or what surgery did they have, and also not making our leads feel uncomfortable, but also not making the audience, like, as an audience member, like, you don't want to feel like you're all up in someone's business, like, not making them feel like, oh, I'm a voyeur and I'm intruding on someone's life. So there was like a lot of emotional calibration going on, which I think we really just did by doing, different versions of different scenes and seeing how it felt.
I thought it felt great. Like, I feel like you guys really struck that balance. But to what you were just bringing up, is that the small crew, no lighting, is that a departure for you from your other films, or most of your films before that been that type of skeletal crew or very intimate way of filming?
No, I did. There was before RBG, when I was making some smaller docs by myself, I did a couple that I mostly shot myself. And I actually found that I loved what you got from, I loved the intimacy that created, and I loved the sort of quality of the sound bites, I guess I would say. But with the downside that, unlike some of my super talented, Matt Heineman and super talented cinematographer colleagues or compatriots, like, I was a terrible shooter. So it's like, oh, it's such a great soundbite. I wish it was lit better. I wish the audio wasn't crap. So like the thing that I raised with the cinematographers, Kate Fallon and Leia Anova, was, I want this to feel like I want it to feel super personal, but like without looking terrible. So like totally not fancy. And no, it's a big departure in terms of the RBG and those docs, where we really we had a substantial crew and substantial lighting. I mean, this was literally no artificial lights. Then we sort of moved away from that, but for the initial interviews.
Sometimes I hate getting this question when I'm not prepared for it, but you've been talking about this film for a while, so I bet you have an answer, because I always think it's an interesting one. But like, is there anything that totally gutted you having to cut in the end, that if we still had DVD extras, that would be your go-to DVD extra?
I am now here's my problem with this question. I find, I don't know if you do, psychologically, once we've cut something
I agree
that I loved, it's like I have amnesia about it, and I like totally don't remember. And although there have been films where that question comes a lot, I'm not sure that I've gotten that. Oh no, I'll say some. It's this is a subject I wish we'd be able to get a little more into. SCIFA is doing a lot of very cool work now with medical students, like educating med students about intersex issues so that they can be better doctors. Like he's like, let's do this advocacy in the most direct way possible. I think that's incredible. We filmed some of it. We filmed him meeting with a bunch of New York City medical students. It was an interesting conversation, but they were medical students, and Saifa, while not a doctor, is super sophisticated on the medical specifics of intersex issues. So the whole conversation was pretty, it would have been, it was not that entertaining to a lay audience, or not even that not that conducive to understanding by lay audience. So I sort of regret that we couldn't have that concept in the film, but like we cut the scene like 12 different ways, and in none of them did we feel like it really worked. So that's in the end didn't end up in the film. But I guess I you know, as a factual thing, I would have liked to include that fact. I think it's very cool that he's doing that.
Got it. Well, we only have time for one more question. So I feel like it's the type of film that really galvanizes people. You know, you and I were having a chat about this at the News and Doc Emmys the other night, and you were talking about how much it's been embraced by the community. So can you tell people from the community and also outside of the community that are watching it and are really motivated to become an ally, or whatever that may be, like how do we support the film and the message of the film, and become or stay allies of this community moving forward?
Yeah, you know, I actually think this is maybe a little bit easier, an easier question on the intersex issue than on some other movements, because the general public knowledge base is so low. And when I've asked intersex people this question so that I can say it after screenings, their number one answer is like, just tell other people about the facts of what intersex means, so that you know, you speak up so that we don't have to. Like when you're at a dinner party, if you say like, oh, I watched a film about like the intersex rights movement, like tell people what that is, explain why the word hermaphrodite is not only offensive but also misleading, because that's like an animal kingdom word that suggests that people have two separate full sets of reproductive organs, male and female. That doesn't exist in human beings. So just so that when someone then learns about people that aren't out as intersex, like they're intersex, that they're not picturing some kind of you know, a phrase that they all cringe at but think about all the time, some kind of circus freak, half man half woman situation. Like, no, this is one of the natural variations on the spectrum of human beings, of which, if one thinks about it, we all know there's all kinds of variations in the ways that we can be. You know, gender has become this painfully hotbed issue in a way, you know, that I think many people wish it weren't. And just kind of sort of like, I don't like to use the word normalize, because like the people in the film are already normal. Like they don't need me to normalize them, but just like talking openly about the fact of intersex. Now, to get more specific, is there's sort of like some educate yourself stuff. There's a group called Interact, and you can Google them and see what they're, you know, they're both education and advocacy. There's also a group called Interconnect, that's like a national intersex support group. And if people are intersex or have intersex friends, they can lead them to that. I will tell you, being in the interesting position of being a filmmaker who just made a film about intersex people, quite a number of people, including friends of mine, have come out to me as intersex since the film came out. So if I was in any doubt that like this is not a rare situation, I'm not in doubt. I'm not in that doubt anymore.
Wow. Well, thank you, Julie. Thank you for putting this film out into the world. Thank you for just being you. Anyone
Thank you for being you, Ryan.
Anyone in our community knows that Julie is one of the biggest cheerleaders of all of us. So thank you for this film, and thank you for all of your films. And thank you to its Focus Features, right, that is putting this out into the world.
Yes.
And of course, the IDA for programming, because I think this film is a great a great step forward. I hope as many people as possible see it. So thank you for making it.
Thank you so much.